Hi everyone, for this assignment you are going to need your 3.4 paper out. I'd also recommend having your periodic table handy. And while you complete this ed puzzle, if you're working with a friend right now, that's fine. Just make sure you're both completing the ed puzzle because I'm going to check to make sure that everyone completed it. So if you are doing this right now with someone else, just make sure you both have your own devices going. So you've got some do now questions. Your first is, what charge will a magnesium ion develop? And hopefully you said 2+ or +2, because magnesium is in group 2 of the periodic table. It's got 2 valence electrons, so that means it is going to lose both of those valence electrons to get to its closest noble gas, which is neon. Your next question, what is the chemical formula for magnesium nitride? So the first thing you're going to want to do with this one is look up what the charges will be for magnesium and nitrogen. So magnesium, we already said, is 2+. Find nitrogen on your periodic table, and it has a charge of 3-. So what would the chemical formula be? After crisscrossing those charges, you should have gotten Mg with a subscript 3 and nitrogen with a subscript 2. Remember, you just crisscross the number part, don't crisscross the positive or negative. And finally, what is the name for Na2O? And that would be sodium oxide. Remember, the metal keeps its name, and the nonmetal, the anion, gets the "ide" ending. All right, so quick question. What would you rather, chopsticks for hands or office chair wheels for feet? I feel like office chair wheels would be pretty fun, but sometimes they get a little wonky, and it might be kind of tough using office chair wheels in the grass or going uphill. But could be a fun experience. I hope you guys appreciate my my unsophisticated editing skills. So your essential question is, have you ever heard of a compound that ended with 8? Give an example. And so if you did the homework assignment, you probably saw a couple examples of this, but you might have just heard of something in everyday life. And so if you've heard of something that has an 8 ending, most likely it is an example of a compound that has a polyatomic ion. And so that's an ion that contains one or more atoms covalently bonded. So previously, we just learned about monatomic ions. So this is just like your basic single atom. So like nitrogen becomes nitride. But polyatomic ions, they behave in the same way, except instead of being a single atom, it is like a clump of atoms that are bonded together. And so the individual atoms, like right here with nitrate, the N's and the O's don't have a charge. But when they're all combined together, they have a charge of -1. So this would behave like any other anion that has a -1 charge, like fluoride or chloride. Notice that nitrate is really similar to nitrite. It just has 1 less oxygen. Same with sulfate and sulfite, just 1 less oxygen. I just got an error message. I hope this is still recording. Okay, so when you write the formula unit for a compound that contains a polyatomic ion, you still do the same thing where you figure out what their charges are. You're going to go ahead and crisscross those charges. So sodium has a 1+, so the 1 goes to the carbonate, and the 2 goes down to the sodium. And so this would just be Na2 and then CO3. We didn't include the 1 because remember, you don't need to include 1s for the carbonate. So it's pretty straightforward. The only difference is that if you need to put a subscript next to a polyatomic that already has a subscript, then that's when you need to use parentheses. So for example, we switch those charges. So Mg2, if you didn't add the parentheses, it would look like magnesium with 1 nitrogen and 32 oxygens. That's not the case. We need 2 of those NO3 nitrates. So what you would do instead is Mg, put your NO3, your polyatomic in parentheses, and then you put the 2 outside of that. When you write the name, don't add "ide", just keep it as magnesium nitrate or sodium carbonate. Don't try to add any "ide" endings to a polyatomic. And so these are some common polyatomic ions that you should be familiar with because you're going to have a quiz next class on them. I'll give more details about this quiz at the end of this video. But notice how almost all of these are anions. They have a negative charge. We have one example of a cation with a positive charge right here. So for these, you're going to be filling this out on your paper. I have put the polyatomic ions in parentheses just to help you identify them easier. And so we've got NH4 right here, and so that is ammonium. And then if you've also got another atom, like a monatomic ion here, then it just does the same thing where it gets the "ide" ending. So you just say the name of the polyatomic ion, wherever it is, and the other elements, we still follow the same rules as last time. So this would be ammonium chloride. And then this next one, Be, is just your regular element, so we keep its name normal, so beryllium. And then SO4 is not a monatomic, it's polyatomic. So remember, keep in mind we've got an SO4 and an SO3, so make sure you get the right one. So this would be beryllium sulfate. So with the polyatomic ions, you just keep the name as is, don't do any "ide" endings for the polyatomic part. But if it's one of the regular monatomic ions, then you still do the "ide" ending. Okay. And so now for these ones, I've given you the name and you need to figure out what the chemical formula would be. So first we've got lithium, which is just a regular element, and then acetate. So that is one of our polyatomics. So first you want to write down what their charges are. So lithium is +1, acetate we can see up here is -1. And so you're going to write down those chemical formulas. Lithium is Li, acetate is the C2H3O2. And in this case, it's pretty simple because they both have a charge of 1, so you don't need to worry about any subscripts here. Next, we have aluminum chromate. So aluminum, if you look on your periodic table, has a charge of 3+. And if you look up here, you find chromate, and it has a charge of 2-. So you've got aluminum and chromate. And notice that when I crisscrossed the charges, remember the chromate had the 2, it gave it to the aluminum, and the aluminum gave its 3 to the chromate. Make sure you're really careful with these. If there is already a subscript on the polyatomic ion, then you have to put your polyatomic ion in parentheses, because if you didn't include it, it would look like there was 1 Cr and 43 oxygens, which you don't want that. That is not a real thing. So you want to say that there are 3 chromates, or 3 of those CrO4s. You can still use the parentheses up here, like in example number 3, if you want. They just are not required only if you have like another subscript going outside of the polyatomic like this. Okay, so details on your quiz. I do have a couple Quizlets made by students a few years ago to study those polyatomic ions, so I'll share those with you in a moment. This is how this is going to work. For the next 3 classes, you are going to have a different version of the same quiz on polyatomic ions. I'm just going to keep whatever your highest score is. So if you want to just wait and not study until the very last one and hope you do well, you can do that. But I want to incentivize you to study earlier. So if you earn a 100 on one of the quizzes, you just get a 100. If you earn a 100 on 2 of the quizzes, then your grade is 103. But if you earn a 100 every single time, then you get a 105. So that's your incentive. This is kind of what the format's going to look like. I covered these guys, so you can't see them all. But you will have 4 questions where I give you the polyatomic ion formula, and you have to write the name. So CO3, you would have to know what that is, and you'd write it here. And then for these ones, it'll be 4 different ones. I will give you the name, and you need to write the formula. So that means you need to know which letters are capital, which are lowercase, where's the subscripts, where are the exponents. So this one's a little bit trickier. The Polyatomic Ion Quizlets there's QR codes and URLs at the back of this, your paper. The first one, this one was made by, I think this was Thomas McCormick. So if you look, these are just the name and the formula. So if you want to quiz yourself in that way. But I also had Kalen Gerwig a couple of years ago. He did that, but he also added down here, he did the name with the formula, and then the other side of the card would be the charge. So if you want to just practice setting the charges, then that would be a good one to review as well. So you are going to work on page 2 here with some practice. There are your links to the Quizlets, and then you've got a couple of little maze activities to do on the next page. So homework, finish up this and study with the Quizlets for your first polyatomic ion quiz, which will be next class. Let me know if you guys have any questions here.